If you're in church leadership, I know three things about you. First is you're a busy person. Second, you're juggling very many responsibilities. And third, the work is never done. And then I come along and say, and another part of your job is to raise up the next generation of leaders. It's enough to overwhelm you, isn't it? But it is important that we see our job in that bigger picture of bringing on others, raising up the next generation of leaders. So what's got to happen for that, for reality in your life and in your church? Well, the first thing is this: you need to be persuaded biblically it's the right thing to do. Now, you may get that from Jethro, encouraging Moses to see leaders of 10s, leaders of 50s, leaders of bigger numbers than that, but leaders all the way through the church. You may get it from Acts chapter 6, where you see different kinds of leaders being appointed, preacher, teachers, but others who can minister mercy. You may get it from the Apostle Paul, always working together in teams of leaders and bringing on others. But you need to be persuaded that's the biblical thing to do. And then secondly, you need to model 2 Timothy 2, verse 2 in your life. What you've heard, you pass on to others. That needs to be built into your life. But the second challenge you face is this: where are you going to get those leaders from? Well, there are 2 sources. Acts 11 shows us when Barnabas was under great pressure in Antioch, when it was beyond his own personal capacity, he went and found Saul in Tarsus, searched for him, brought him back, and together they taught the church. You may need to go and find someone to bring into your church, to help your church. You may need to consider thinking, could I set up a training fund? We're the first generation of property owning people. It means older people now may be cash poor but asset rich. They come to make a will. Could they leave some to God's work? Could you envision them to leave some money to a training fund? And my generation, your generation, we are receiving inheritances. Could we not give the vision of people who've inherited wealth to say, could you give some to a training fund so that I could go and find an assistant, a trainee, an apprentice? The other source, and maybe for most of us the source, is leaders from within the church. The problem with that is that they don't look like leaders when you first meet them. In Acts chapter 16, we find Paul coming across young Timothy, and young he was. When you look at the biblical chronology, Timothy was probably late teens, might have been early 20s. Today, thinking of investing in someone in their late teens might seem, well, he's too young, he's not proven himself yet. But you see, leaders don't come fully grown. You have to spot potential. Paul knew that Timothy was well spoken of, not only by his own church, but by another fellowship. And in one sense, he took a calculated risk. I'm going to invest in this young man. Are you doing that? I think what's happened over the last 50 years is that we've aged. We now tend to think of leaders as appointing them as young men in their 30s, but they're not young men then. Let me tell you, Guy Gibson, who commanded the force that did the dam busting raid, he was 24 years old when he led the dam busters. That puts our idea of young people in perspective, doesn't it? We need to be thinking of investing for maybe a decade or more before someone proves themselves and then goes off for, say, some kind of formal training. We need to see our role as trying to invest in those potential leaders all the way through the church. And the third thing, the third challenge of raising up the next generation, is that you'll need to build it in your timetable intentionally. You know what it's like with people's giving. If you give what's left over, there's very little left over. If you give what's left over of your time to a next generation or the generation beneath, there won't be any time over. Build it into your timetable. Think seriously, what could I impart to this young person? They may later get formal training, or it may be after formal training, but they will tell you, I've still got so much to learn. And once you get your mind on it, like the Lord Jesus did, making it a high priority, you'll find this idea of leaving a legacy becomes a reality. You are going to be part of continuing gospel growth for the future. 3 big things worth taking on into your life so that your church has an ongoing gospel legacy.